All right, cool. Plan weekly meeting 16th of March. Should be 16th of March. I have the first item. Awesome. What is it? Oh yeah, so it's just an update on what we're going to focus on in 1410 for product planning backend at least, which will be confidential notes. Yeah, so Eugenia worked already to break this down, and the feature's actually pretty much already in the code base. In fact, more than we would want is in the code base. So most of the challenge here is going to be to kind of get it production ready so that we can start rolling out the feature flag. We like to roll out the feature flag, as soon as possible so that we can start testing it internally, because the main risk with this piece of work is that they're not confidential in some way, that they're leaked through activity feeds or email notifications or RSS feeds or some other place we haven't thought about. So yeah, we scheduled a technical kickoff for tomorrow, provided everyone can attend. Of course, I'm not going to be there. It's St. Patrick's Day, so feel free to move it if you can't make it. What else? Yeah, so like just quickly on the feature, the idea is that you can have confidential notes in issuables, specifically issues and epics. We don't want confidential MR diff notes. Once you've made a note confidential, if there's a discussion underneath it, you can't make it public anymore, because you would have to then make all the notes public in that discussion item. So that would be weird, right? Because you'd be making other people's comments public. Anything else? Yeah, for a note that's in a discussion, probably doesn't make sense to make that public because the rest of the context won't be there either. So it's pretty limited, but pretty much meets like 90% of what people want. The one weird thing about it is that currently in the API, without respecting the feature flag, you can flip any note to be private, including MRDiff notes and everything. I'm not sure why that's in the API currently, but that's what the RCA into unfinished features was supposed to help us find out. Okay, so that's confidential notes. Yeah, and you have the next item.
Yeah, I was just wondering if we need someone from frontend on the meeting tomorrow to sync up about any potential missing pieces on frontend side. But if we are sure that frontend is already finished, it may not be necessary.
Yeah, so as far as I understand it, most of the front end is completed. So there's a tick box when creating a new comment to make it confidential. So as far as that's concerned, it's completed. There might actually be some work required to remove that. I'm not sure. We need to really interrogate the feature a little bit. Eugenie might actually already know. It would be helpful to have somebody from front end on the call though. Alex? Sorry.
I think I've been reviewing some of the work on the confidential notes, and there was a large discussion, and I think that prevented a merge of a change or something related to toggling the top note confidentiality, because there is a race condition when maybe a reply to that note is being added at the same time, and there was no easy way to ensure that you kind of preserve the same settings, so to say, to the reply and to the original note. So I think there was a kind of a problem to solve there, which I'm not sure if it was addressed or if it's still something to be paying attention to.
Yeah, that would still be a problem, because the idea is if you're replying to a note that's private, your reply will also be private. If you're typing your reply and the author of the original note flips it to be public, then there's a race condition there where when you submit your comment, it will be public and you may think it's going to be private. The easiest way to fix that would simply be to make it so they're not toggleable at all in the first iteration. So it's either a private comment or it's not.
I think we can use some logs, but it needs to be tested because I think we have an index on the discussion ID or something, and we can find that original node and place a lock on update, not allowed to update the original node basically in the meantime. So yeah, I don't know. It's something to be just wanted to mention that may be one of the kind of bigger things to see, tougher things to solve, so to say. But yeah.
When I've looked at other tools that have this, you can't switch it from private to public and public to private. Like Zendesk is the one that comes to mind. Once you define whether it's like private or public, that's pretty much it, probably because of edge cases and potential to expose data.
It's potentially
Yeah,
just
there
much
are many.
easier.
There are many edge cases where you have the original, the note as confidential, and then within that replies non-confidential. How do you display that thread in general and so on? So yeah.
Let's make that a requirement then, Melissa, if you don't mind, because it's actually just easier to create it that way anyway. We don't have to look for the special case where the note doesn't have any replies. We just make it so that it's not toggleable at all. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not costing any usability really, because if you want to make the note public, you just copy it into a public note, right?
There is always the problem where someone posted a note and then says, well, it should have not been, and I want to talk about, I guess you can then sort of delete it, but then you probably need permission to delete the entire thread. So like if you posted a note, you didn't realize it's kind of private sensitive information, someone replied to it, and then you don't have a way to either delete it or even turn it as confidential, if that makes sense, right? So anyway, that probably should go into a wider discussion later on the issue itself.
Yeah, and we could always introduce that in a later iteration, right? The first iteration could be you can't switch it, and then later, as we think through all the edge cases and all the scenarios, we could introduce toggling.
Okay. So I'm making sure, but I think I get it from the discussion. When you're all saying notes, we mean comments and threads, right? Or something more like the activity notes. Comments and threads.
Comments and threads, yeah, exclusively.
Right.
I think we usually, as developers, refer to the activity notes as system notes or something like that.
I wanted to say that in my question, but then I thought, is it like what's real system thing?
Yeah, just as a
Yep.
context, we would usually say, well, system notes, and that will mean that's not user created.
Cool, thanks. Melissa?
Yeah, I have the next item, and it's more of discussions about requirements. I know the product planning team has been doing a lot of back-end work to basically get requirements data into the work items, into the right tables. But I was just curious to hear from the group about what's next into having this be more of like a user-facing change, and what are the steps to get there to basically have this be more consolidated from the front end perspective.
I added one note about this. I think that so far frontend still uses the old requirements API. So I would expect that one of necessary steps would be switching frontend to the new work item API, but I suspect there are still missing bits for requirements in this API, specifically exposing the test reports for requirements. So I would expect we need some widget representation of test reports in this API. That was my first thought. But yeah, maybe Felipe knows about other bits as he's more familiar with this work.
Yeah, it's pretty much it. And also, there are still a list of deprecations about the old requirement object we have to do, removing fields and stuff like that. So yeah, we have to, as you said, have a new API for the requirements as work items, which is still not done, and deprecation tasks.
So a intentionally provocative question. Would we want to switch the old UI to use the work items API, or do we think we should basically build up the work items front end to satisfy requirement needs?
I think one thing to consider, we're going to do the Spiker POC for the widget architecture. And I think we talked about having the test reports be like a widget. And so I think if we were to use the work items front end, we would have to have that sorted out first so that we could widgetize the test reports thing. And then we'd have to add description, which is what we're sort of working on next anyways. So hopefully we could unblock that widgetization of the test reports after this next release, I think. But somebody can keep me honest if I'm mistaken.
I think that makes sense. I mean, I'm not very familiar with requirements or test cases, but I think, yeah, we discussed that we're going to push widgetizing a little bit for a later release. And we've been talking about not introducing that much stuff into the work items API, as if it's going to be widgetized, it makes no sense to have it at the root level, for example. I mean, fields or anything in the work items API if we're going to remove them in the future. I mean, so I don't know if it's a huge blocker, if we could do something to start using it. I don't know.
What are test reports? what is the summary of that feature?
It's the thing that is basically you connect it to, well, actually, Jan, I think you implement it, so you can speak to it if you'd like, better than me probably.
Yeah, so when user defines some requirements, requirement could be, so my product matches some feature, so it can map it to test runs, yeah, either in CI, so you can, on each CI run, you can reference that requirement was met. So test report is representation of meeting or of succeeding or failing a requirement at some time, yeah, or on CI run, if it makes sense.
Gotcha. Okay.
So
thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a pretty, I mean, from the widget perspective, like it's a pretty big leap from description to test report. I think like that's like a more, if I'm kind of understanding the scope of the test report functionality, looking at this issue you linked, Gabe. So that could be as part of that widgets POC. Like I mean, description first, given that it's sort of straightforward. I think we had talked about assignees or one of the other, excuse me, one of the other more kind of deeper like functionality widget, but test report could be an interesting one to kind of prove out some of the weird things we need to solve for that.
Yeah, I think eventually we sort of I think I talked to Mark about this, and the idea was to eventually build out that little widget experience so that you could view like all the times that that has been run and where and who like triggered the test and like when it failed and if it went back to satisfied, basically. Because in the UI, all it shows right now is satisfied or failed. But I think we're already capturing all that like historical data that we can kind of surface to eventually. So we can start super small if we want with it and just surface what we do in the current requirements UI is EMVC. But yeah, it would be a fun one to explore and I think help us push the limits of how we're thinking about building widgets.
If this would be a big blocker, then we might consider to, for example, define some separate small API for fetching test reports separately from work item, so it wouldn't be necessarily part of widget API or work item API, but it will be just temporary API to get these test reports, which would allow us to move quicker to switching to using work items API for requirements.
It's interesting that there's two different things. So if you list requirements, you get the last test report state and last test report manually created. So there are two ways to satisfy a test report. One is through the CI, in which case it's automatically marked as passed or failed or satisfied or failed. And the other one is to have a manual check. And that's what this does. But also it returns all test reports, which I think might be not even necessary for the list page. You just need the last test report state. So those two things, like last test report state and last test report manually created, could be a widget themselves. And then like you could search separately for test reports related to that requirement.
I have one comment about this whole widget work and the APIs. I feel like, and we don't have it, but like I sometimes feel the need of having some sort of an internal API, like a GraphQL, but internal API, so that we don't add it to the public, do all this stuff with the widgets and so on. And then when we feel it's ready to be promoted to a public API, we can promote it, but it'll serve us to do all of the front end and UI and be able to change it back and forth as many times as we need. Without having to do this maintenance over, now I think it's one release, which is a year, to maintain the entire API for everyone and make sure it's not broken for customers and so on. So it's probably not a discussion for this group, but I wonder if that's something we can raise at the company level to have some sort of an internal API, either GraphQL. I think it will be GraphQL because we kind of try and push towards that, but like something that we can use as developers. And then once we feel that that's what it should look like, let's promote it to a public API and so on.
I do think we discussed a little bit of that, well, everything is behind the feature flag right now. And last time we talked with Brett and Gabe and Jake, I think we all agree that this API, as we're moving forward and doing proof of concepts and everything, it's actually kind of something like what you just mentioned. We just said that we should be very explicit in the API description that this is subject to change, experimental, and can be changed without notice at any time. And we already
but
did that.
We are hitting this problem now with iteration cadences, right? It was behind the feature flag all the way, but now we are kind of having this problem where we cannot move forward because what if it's enabled, what if it's disabled back, and so on and so forth. So even though it's behind the feature flag, it's still kind of a public facing, and people can enable, disable feature flags, or even us can do this tweaking back and forth, and it's not exactly the same. But yeah, again, this is probably not a discussion for this session, but something that maybe we should bring as engineers to the
Would be
yeah,
useful.
engineering group, and see if we can find something that would work for us, and just like make it easier for us to test stuff and then promote to a more public and maintainable thing.
Makes sense.
Anyone want to take an action item there to follow up on it? Or is this purely aspirational?
I can take it. I can post a question in GraphQL or in backend maintainers and start a discussion, maybe start an issue and see what people think about it. So yeah, I'll take it.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, and did you get a chance to verbalize yours?
Yeah, I remember that previously I used experimental I used a node that some endpoint is experimental to make it clear in API that this is subject to change. I think we used it on a couple of places, but I'm not sure that this was somehow standardized. So it's just another option or idea.
Cool, thanks. Next two items are read only. Does that mean you want to read them only? Or does that mean we shouldn't discuss them? Melissa, you've got the next one.
Let's save it for next time.
All right, cool. Martin, what about you?
It's to read that you need to read them on your own time.
Got it. All right, thanks. Cool. In that case, I have the next one. So yes, at this point, we've merged the front-end component of Epic Links and enabled it for GitLab.org or GitLab.org, GitLab.com, and a few other groups, I think, as well. So that gives us roughly 24 hours to test it before we merge the MR that defaults it to on. That MR has already been reviewed by moi and needs maintainer review. So it's pretty much ready to go. Any thoughts on how we should test it to ensure that it works over the next 24 hours? And Martin, you had a comment as well.
My comment is a question. Are we expecting any more features related to related epics before the end of the milestone?
You mentioned we have docs for listing related epics and viewing them in the UI. Do we not have docs for creating them and removing them in the UI as well?
So what I mentioned is, so Jan has a merge request for that, but for the API. And that's all I know.
So I have REST API merge request in review, but the documentation is part of this merge request, but I'm not sure this will be merged before the deadline. So yeah, there will be also another merge request for REST API for deleting these links. But again, the documentation will be part of this functionality implementation.
Awesome, thanks. I'm mostly asking for stuff that's code is being worked on, and then like there's no docs attached to it. So ping me if you need something urgent just before the freeze or whatever.
What needs to happen for those to go in today? Like, if they're docs only, can we like assign multiple DRIs and then march in, have you do maintainer review?
So So docs merge requests, like in general, docs changes are we're a bit more flexible with that. So that then we just code. So even if we miss the so-called freeze for code, it's usually no problem to just add the label pick into whatever. Because let me think. To answer your question, you can assign me, but if it's outside of my working hours, you can go to the docs channel in Slack and just ask whoever, and whoever can do it. But yeah, like I said, my main question was like, is there, for example, a merge request adding a feature to the UI that doesn't have docs in it that I don't know about?
I believe that for UI, the functionality is already merged, so I'm not aware of additional UI specific Borg. Felipe, do you know, or can you confirm?
Yeah, I don't know if any other feature for any additional things for UI. I only see things like displaying related epics on epics lists, but I think this is for another release. So I think that's it for now.
Cool. Okay, thank you. Also, I just realized that I should have thought about it a bit more before asking, because yes, the docs have the UI actions for adding a link type and removing, and I don't know what else we could add there as well. So I think we're good. We can move on.
Cool. So my second question was maybe to Melissa, what can we do to assuage your concerns that this might have some faults, or what can we do to test it in the next 24 hours that would reassure you that we can release it in 14.9?
Yeah, so I took a look this morning and found one small bug, but other than that, all the happy path stuff looks good. And then I also let other GitLab PMs, there were a couple of people that were really excited about this feature. So I let them know that it's available now, so they'll be taking a look. And if nothing else comes up, we can probably, like by the end of my working day, we can set it to default on.
Don't suppose you know what the bug was off the top of your head?
Yes, it was the token indicator of hashtag. Basically, when you put it in the text field, it would search for issues to relate to, but then it can't do it. So it was a front end bug, but Kushal's already taking a look and has a fix in the work.
Can live with that. Cool. Martin, you need another comment.
So my question is to all the PMs in the call, if we have any other release post merge requests that I don't know about yet. I think yes, the one that Gabe shared, thank you, is the one that I'm aware of. But if there's anything else, also let me know. Thank you. And this is the end of the agenda items.
I will stop recording.